thank you, and we'll talk about what makes a good pilot, a better pilot, and a proficient pilot. And if you don't know us from the New England FAASTeam, here we all are. This is myself here with my compatriot, John Wood from the Portland, Maine FSDO. You want to say hello, John?
Hi, folks. Good to have you with us tonight.
Yeah, thank you. And Dan Carter is not with us this evening. He was planning on it, but things have changed a little bit. But Dan is the Operations FAASTeam Program Manager for the Bradley FSDO, but we do have with us Rob Leonard, who is the Airworthiness FAASTeam Program Manager for the Bradley FSDO. You want to say hello, Rob?
Sure do. Hi, everybody. It's good to be on board with you guys, even though I'm not a pilot and I'm just an airworthiness avionics junkie.
Yeah, you'll still get questions. Don't worry. You'll still learn about the WINGS program. But we do have, actually, this is a terrific thing to mention. We have courses, we have seminars, we have programs, we even have webinars. A couple of your compatriots down in the Carolinas do probably some of the more prevalent FAASTeam maintenance-related webinars with it. But we have the same program. We have the AMT program on FAASTeam.gov for the maintenance side of the house, which is excellent. Excellent.
Okay.
All right. So everybody always asks just a couple housekeeping items before we do get going. WINGS credit for this, we'll use the email that you did register for this webinar with. We'll upload it in a few days. For recording of these webinars, for those that do miss it, or if you have technical glitches, and that's on the Boston FAASTeam YouTube channel, you can subscribe to that to get notified. Also, we have been working on building courses off of some of our webinars. In the last month or so, I've gotten 2 of them up. We have one from our December webinar titled, "Oh No, I'm Landing Out," and that's on FAASTeam.gov, course number ALC 612. And the one from January, "Gliding for the Airplane Pilot," ALC 629, and that just got put up online about 2 or 3 days ago. And then we also do have handouts. Do take a look at the handouts tab with it. And if you're curious what that looks like, oops, I thought I had it highlighted. I apologize about that, folks, but it'll be right over in your control panel over on the side. So also, many of us with the current situation are getting all sorts of questions about it, and I did want to notify you of this. You might have seen 1 or 2 little stories on it, but there's much more to it. Is tomorrow the FAA is going to publish some exemption policies in the Federal Registrar. You probably can see those, actually, believe it or not. You can look up any exemption that the FAA gives through the FAA Automation Exemption Service. That's the website for it right there. But there's going to be policy on expiring medicals for general aviation pilots, also for Part 121 pilots, and that exemption number is 18516. And for 135 pilots, an exemption issued to the National Air Transportation Association, and that'll be exemption 18515. That will be published tomorrow in the Federal Register. But these 2 exemptions, if you search under those numbers, you can actually see them ahead of time right here on this page. New England FAASTeam, we've done a lot of webinars in the past, and we have normally done at least 1 per month, and been doing that for 4 or 5 years now. But with the current conditions, we've jumped on and done a whole lot, we know this is probably the type of flying that we're all doing right now for the most part, is on the computer screen, and we want to help you out. So we've added a few of these. Is Saturday in the morning, since you're probably not going to be able to go to the airport and keep up that social distancing that everybody's talking about, we're going to do a webinar on the aging pilot. John will be leading that one off. Friday the 10th, we're looking at doing a review of the accidents from the FAA fiscal year 2019, which ended last October, but we do that once a year around this time. And myself and one of the safety reps from Rob's district, David Strasberg, will be joining us for that. And we have us be doing some safety rep training we have the monthly one on the 28th, but you may want to keep your eyes and ears open on FAASTeam.gov for these. And, it is changing times for us. We're all accustomed to those seminars and stuff. Now we're moving to a lot of things that are webinars, videos. Now is the time to kind of catch up on that knowledge side of things. So we do want you to think about that, is take the time now while you have it to educate yourself. And also, if you're an aircraft owner, and even pilot at any level, is to improve your aircraft and improve yourself, is take advantage of some of these things. And I'm just going to emphasize, is think about it in the future. I know doing in-route inspections and flying at a lot of flight schools and Checkrides, I have gotten sick from flying an aircraft with other people before. You may want to, continuing about today of wiping down cockpits after flights or before your flight, especially oxygen masks. Oh, I've gotten so sick from oxygen masks. So we do want to just bring that up. Now, tonight, what we're planning on talking about is these subjects, why proficiency is important, talk a little bit about accidents versus proficiency, a little bit about the review of flight review regulations, new pilots, continuing pilots, and what I would call the about to retire pilot. Many of us are in that situation as we do get older and older, and annual currency programs. And then think about what you can be doing today to get back in line when all of this is over. Now, each pilot is a little bit different, and the big question that we always have is, are you a proficient pilot? A proficient pilot may be proficient in only one type of aircraft. You might be flying air carriers all the time, or just one of these others, but you want to make sure that you have the highest level of proficiency for the type of flying that you are doing. And the two kind of big things I would say that really make the difference on this is, are you part of an organization, and are you doing annual checking of yourself? We know that on the airline side, where they 9 or 12-month intervals, and we've seen such a big difference in the safety realm there. And proficiency training does work, whether it be sports, medicine, or aviation. These are all three fields that we know you have to practice, and practice what you preach type of thing. And if you're doing proficiency training, you're going to be more confident, comfort, get the opportunity to see things a little bit more, and also keep yourself and the people you fly with safe. And we'll talk a little bit about the wings program tonight, although that's not the absolute end-all be-all or what we're focusing on exclusively, but do recognize anytime you achieve a level of wings, or what we call a wings phase, it does count as a flight review. And that's how I end up renewing my flight review normally. When we do take a look at it from a proficiency part, loss of control is probably the biggest issue that we have in general aviation. Whether it's the VFR and the IMC, distraction, inappropriate response, just skill, or risk management. And if you're practicing out there, proficiency training will help you do that. Now, a couple quotes that we do have with it. You may have heard this one from Vince Lombardi. His practice does not make perfect, only perfect practice makes perfect. So not only, you've heard the saying before, train how you fly how you train. And this one it catches my attention because I've seen this. I can always see myself getting rusty if I've been out of the aircraft for a few days. And think about doing something from time to time beyond just the $100 hamburger. Are there things that maybe you think you need to revisit, refresh? Has it been a while? Now, here's an overall perspective. Each of us in our FSDOs have to put together a report on accidents within the FSDO every year. And in our fiscal year, this goes from October of one year, so October 2018 to September 30th of 2019 for fiscal year 2019, you can see I checked it right around the end of the fiscal year, and you can see how many more accidents we have under Part 91, where other regulatory types, especially the 121 air carriers that have regular proficiency training, are much, much less. Now, it may also be based upon the number of hours flown, but what it is myself, John, Rob, all of us probably see some things trending wise that make us want to stand up on our soapbox. And if we look back at the national trend over the past 10 years, we can see there has been a decrease. We've seen improvements in weather reporting. We've seen improvements in the aircraft, the information available in the aircraft, safety features on the aircraft. We now have the auto land by Garmin available out there. The ballistic parachute has been a big difference. Many different things have improved our safety over the years, and we've seen a decrease in the accident trends based upon that. But each of us in each of our offices have a wait a minute moment. And here's some of the ones we've had in Boston just the last couple of years. At this particular airport, here's two airplanes parked beside each other, that both crashed for nearly the same reasons in nearly the same spot. Just the failure of the pilot to correct for torque effect on the engine, the left turning tendencies on a takeoff, go around, landing, whatever it may be, and ended up in the trees in the same spot. Thankfully, nobody hurt, but two airframes that we basically lost because of that. And also, some disappointed pilots. And even it happens again and again. Wait a minute, we've had this. We have more horrific or tragic accidents, and this one here, or these two, happened in Boston for us a couple years ago with Piper Saratogas. But, as a safety person, you kind of shake your head about it, as these were both a result of pilots landing very long down a runway, and, they break up the airplane like this. And you can even get a little bit of a clue as this is down an embankment over a guard railing off the end of the airport, across the road, through the fence, across the road, over the guard railing, down the hill, and ended up here, with the wing broken off and everything. And pay particular attention. Here's the date that it happened, October 1st, 2017. And notice these trees located here. But wait a minute. Didn't this end up happening, before? Yes, it did. This was just about a year prior. We had another Piper Saratoga that went through the fence, across the road, down the hill, and more people on board. Thankfully, they all got out. But here's that set of trees. Just about a year later, we had another Saratoga for the same reason end up right here in almost the same spot. And, both of these are just because the pilot delayed doing a go-around and attempted to land and stay on the runway, or attempted a very late go-around that should have been done much earlier. And in the Boston FAASTeam for fiscal year 2019, this is what we saw as the major issues: loss of control, maneuvering flight, operator error, and because we haven't closed out every accident, some are still unknown and undetermined. And normally we'll see on this maintenance issues. In fiscal year 2019 for Boston, we didn't see any of those, but we've already seen two of them at least in fiscal year 2020. I don't know, Rob or John, have you guys had any maintenance-related accidents recently in your districts?
Not recently, Steve, but we certainly had a number last year. It seemed that they had been an increase. The trend had been increasing over the last few years.
And this is Rob.
Yep.
Yeah, and
Go ahead.
just the only one that I'm aware of in our district is that B-17 that occurred just at the end of last year. that was fatal. And it was deemed, it was determined that there was a number of maintenance issues that were the contributing factors, if not the determining factor for that accident.
Yeah, it's that one in particular is still out for the NTSB to finally determine, but you probably people have seen it in the press because it was mentioned in the exemption, recension, and lack of grant recently about some factors on it. So that is publicly aware now.
Yes. Yep.
Definitely.
Yep.
You take a look, this is specifically for the Boston FSDO, but I would assume, Rob and John, we see the same thing in almost every FSDO across the country, is when you look at the primary causal factors for the accidents and the incidents that, involved broken airplanes, pilot-induced error by far is way up there. Weather always is, and weather is a very fatal one, the controlled flight into terrain. But we could really make a big difference just based upon that, if not on the accidents, on the incidents. And the incidents are the things that cost you, the pilot, cost the insurance company, in addition to an accident. And you take a look, if we look at contributing factors, what's the biggest one there? Mismanaged controls by the pilot. You see pilot-induced error, loss of control. Those three things right there make a big, big difference. And each time we, the FAA, look at an accident, we look under what are known as the 9 areas of FAA responsibility. These are the things that we look at to see if they have an impact on it. And, the big one, I recognize, I apologize, everyone. There is a typo that snuck through with everything, and that's a copy paste too. Oh well, I'll call it out myself on that one. But airman competency is the big issue. Yeah. That way, I'm mentioning that just so John doesn't and Rob don't have to type 40 answers to it. Yes, we did see it.
We're just showing that we're human too.
Yes, exactly. We are, and that's a big part of what we try to do. You've probably heard from us. In the Boston area, this gives a little bit of an idea. These were the accidents and incidents for fiscal year 2019. And there's a couple little caveats to it. There are one here if the age, cross-referencing the age of the pilot with the months since their flight review. And that may be the months since their check ride or the months since their flight review. If it is 0, those are accidents or incidents that the pilot information has been removed from, which we actually do for incidents if the pilot had no bearing on it. In this particular case, they ended up hitting a deer that ran out onto the runway at night just after they had touched down. Basically a deer jumped onto the engine of the aircraft, and it got real ugly real quick, or jumped into the engine of the aircraft. So I don't know what that pilot's age is. His information or her information was removed. But what is more interesting is up here, you'll see 4 of these are listed at 25 months. And the regulatory requirement for a flight review is right here. We had at least 4 of these that pilots were beyond 24 months. Now, this doesn't show pilot deviations, but to give you an idea, the largest number we had someone that was basically 5 years out of their flight review that we had a pilot deviation with. But on accidents and incidents, that's what we had. And one of the areas we want to focus on, because 4 out of 6 of these here are all people that were basically newly certificated pilots, either had just gotten a private pilot certificate I think one of them had just gotten a commercial pilot certificate. But in this low end, you'll notice we have 6 of these, and 4 out of the 6 of the accidents and incidents that we had in the Boston FSDO were newly certificated pilots. And do you see that too, John, in your area?
Yeah, we see a very similar statistic, Steve. It's you know, we're not identical. There are some slight variations between the FSDOs and what we're seeing, but you know, when you group the FSDOs up here in New England, we tend to have the same factors. You know, I find, and I know you guys find that too, that this tend to affect the accident and incident database, and so we're seeing very similar things.
Yeah. And from a proficient pilot perspective, that's one of the areas we want to focus on. And, you know, this is a slide that I actually use. We have an annual meeting with our DPEs, but to start a discussion with the DPEs, I asked this question of them. I said, you know, you got somebody that just got their certificate, their temporary certificate, and, you know, is walking away from you. For what is your biggest concern for them? You know, do you have an idea where they're going to be 6 months from now, a year from now? Do you know that they really do know that they need to have a flight review within the next 24 months if they're going to act as pilot in command? You know, will they keep flying? What's involved? And John, I'm going to point out to you, correct me if I'm wrong, because I remember, but in the last couple of years, didn't you have a fatal accident that the person was flying home down to Rob's district, if I recall, from doing a check ride up in your district?
Yeah, we did. The check ride was done up in Burlington, Vermont, and the pilot had just received his flight instructor certificate and was flying a multi-engine airplane back home to Connecticut. And the weather had deteriorated, and it ended up being a controlled flight into terrain accident. But it had happened just with 24 hours after taking the check ride.
Yeah, I do remember that, and that's a horrible thing for everybody involved. We don't want that to happen. So here's a question, and this is based upon something I hear all the time. I'm a little poll, and this is going to be a real simple one with it. If we take a look, the poll question is: the best I am as a pilot is right after my check ride, a true false. And I'm going to launch that. Let's see if it comes up, John.
Yep, it's showing there.
And if you would. Next. All right. So we'll give that a little bit of time. Vote early, vote often. We have about 650 of you out there. 60% of you have voted already. But I'm kind of curious. I have my own opinion about what the split will be on this one. So just a few more seconds. We're passing 80%. I'd like to get it up through at least 85% of you. And again, there's about 650, just so you do know. And we're at that point. I'll go ahead and close it. And I'm going to share that with everybody.
Oh, that's interesting. We have the best pilot I am is right after my check ride. We have 39% saying true and 61% saying false.
Interesting. That is very, very interesting. My guess was we'd see about a 50-50 split. That was my personal guess. What did you think, John?
I thought. Yeah, I thought about the same. I thought it would be about a 50-50 split.
Yeah. I wasn't 100% sure, but that was my guess. But we weren't far off from that. Definitely. You know, and there are some things to be said for that, is who is a good pilot. You know, if you've just finished your pilot certificate, you probably are pretty darn good. But one of the things that I would bring about is that is a demonstrated skill set. But have you had an opportunity to practice that skill set? And that's probably the big difference you'll see. You know, this is a check ride from years ago. And the major thing I'm pointing out here is we have 3 different pilots that were involved in all of this. You know, I think the new commercial pilot the designated pilot examiner, and the FAA inspector associated with this. And each of them, because they fly in a different environment, has a different requirement for currency. We have the basic requirement of the flight review, and I'll talk about that a little bit, is, a review of current general operating and flight rules of Part 91 of this chapter. One of the things that I do for that current part is I keep a cheat sheet of what is new and different in the past 12 to 24 months, and we'll brief with a person doing a flight review on that. For the instructors out there, it has at the discretion of the person giving the review. What does that mean? What do you cover? And one of our advisory circulars in the handout can help you with that. And you and I have talked about this, I think, if not once, 100 times, John. The regulation says a minimum of 1 hour of flight training and 1 hour of ground training. And all the time we have instructors that will say to us, geez, people come in and they haven't been flying for a while and they just want it to happen quickly, want that 1 hour of flight training, 1 hour of ground training. And that may not be your best way to be a proficient pilot. Something I've kind of found through experience, and this isn't like 8,000 plus hours of dual given now, plus all the check rides that I've never kept track of. I've tended to find for every year since your last proficiency check, you should plan on 1 hour of flight training and 1 hour of ground training, in order to kind of check. If you've been doing it regularly and you're getting checked, that may work, and there's nothing wrong with doing a flight review early. But for someone that's out closer to the 24 months, I usually find you're going to need a good couple hours of ground training and probably a couple hours of flight training with them too. And for someone 5 years out, I personally would recommend budgeting, 5 hours of ground and 5 hours of flight training. Now, there are ways you can mitigate that, change that, even things like these webinars here, and courses and stuff, seminars with the FAASTeam can help with that. But you're still going to probably find the longer you are out, the difference it is in order to be there. And, each of these, go ahead, John.
No, I was going to say that's a great point, Steve, and I like that kind of formula that you apply to it. And sometimes we are our own worst enemies as pilots too. We get so focused on the cost of flying, and we want to keep the cost as low as possible. And so we look at the regulations, and we see those minimums of an hour of flight training, an hour of ground training, and we think that's a goal to aim for. That's what I'm going to aim for. That's what I want to achieve. I don't want to spend any more than that. The regs say I'm good to go with that. But you kind of have to read behind the spirit of the reg and ask yourself, well, just because you met the regulatory requirement, does that make you safe? I mean, it's not just your responsibility to yourself, but it's the responsibility you have to your passengers and those people that you carry in that airplane with you.
There's a difference too for the currency and proficiency level that we look for each of these individuals. The flight review is required of this new commercial pilot, but we've talked about this, and we've upped the ante, I guess is a way to describe it, even on the DPEs over the recent years. As a DPE, to do a check ride, you basically have to have the currency to carry a passenger, just like a commercial pilot will, in terms of flight review, in terms of takeoffs and landings in the category class, all of that with it. But we've added in the last few years some experience requirements in the past year, and they're not insignificant. In the case of airplane pilots, airplane DPEs, they have to have 60 hours a year pilot in command. The check rides don't count. They have to have 60 hours outside of the check rides in airplanes, and they have to have at least 10 in each category and class. So if the DPE is, doing tests in single and multi-engine airplanes, that DPE has to have 60 hours pilot and command time in an airplane, and they need to have at least 10 for the multi-engine land, 10 for the single-engine land.
And that's a good point too, Steve. Yeah, the slide might be stuck, but that's a good point that you bring up too. Is that you know, when you fly with the DPE, there's kind of an assumption, or there has been an assumption in the past that that person has put in a lot of time behind the controls of an airplane recently, and that person usually has put in a lot of time behind the controls of an airplane, period. But what we found in the FAA was there were cases where the person may have given a number of check rides and spent a lot of time in the airplane, but wasn't putting in a lot of stick time themselves. And so that's why the change was made to that rule to actually require DPs to put in a minimum amount of stick time themselves in the aircraft if they're going to be out there acting as pilot examiners.
Yeah, and they have to have annual training meeting above and beyond that, and also observation and proficiency tests. You know, this is one of the terrific DPEs in the country that I've worked with, and you know, it's always interesting. You know, the applicants love to see the DPE get a check ride after they just passed. You know, they're like, oh, so the shoe is now on the other foot. You know, and as a safety inspector, it even changed. We got to do basically the same as a DPE. Plus, we have to do quarterly currency that is just like a check ride. They don't call it a check ride, but we have to do the equivalent of a commercial check ride, basically. And if we don't meet standards, you know, we're going to have a discussion. Yeah, so it's pretty close to a check ride every quarter. And then we do have a check ride in each category, class, and type, you know, once a year, above and beyond. So, you know, we're doing this, that, and more. Now, there are some exceptions to the flight review, just to be aware. You know, if you do a practical test, just like that gentleman did it with a qualified examiner, that counts as a flight review because he was getting a new certificate rating or operating privileges. And if that's done with a pilot examiner, a check airman under 135, 121, or check airman in armed forces, you know, a flight instructor practical test by examiner, or this is what we focus on just because people don't like to spend the extra money of doing extra check rides all the time. You know, doing a FAASTeam, the FAA sponsored Pilot Proficiency Awards program, which we call WINGS. Now, a couple things that I hear about these exceptions you want to be careful of is it doesn't mean when you get a new certificate that you get a new flight review. It is based upon this practical test here. And, you know, so if you're a foreign pilot coming into the United States and get a private pilot certificate issued on your foreign pilot one, you still have to do the flight review. Say if you're a military instructor, you know, that has not had a check recently within the armed forces, but getting a flight instructor certificate based upon MilComp, you might have to do a flight review. You know, doesn't just mean. And so one of the things we do know is the new pilot is a good airplane driver. There's no question about that. They have that skill set. But then the question comes up, do they know about risk and how to mitigate it? You know, have they developed being that good aeronautical decision maker yet? And that's the thing that I want to talk about. And it makes you wonder, who is the better pilot here? You know, I'll let you form your own opinions about this picture, but you know, that's one of the things is somebody may be able to have driven the airplane fairly well and done okay at decision making, and they're walking away with a new certificate, but they may not be really as proficient of a pilot as they may be or could be. And I'll mention this, at the end of this, I specifically have a survey question that I'd like to hear from you, is what did you miss in your training? I.e., what do you wish you had learned in your training versus that you ended up learning through the School of Hard Knocks after? You know, maybe not on the ACS or whatever, but when you do this, think about what you missed in your training. Maybe the DPE hinted to you that a maneuver or subject was not quite as good as it could have been. Were you afraid of something on your check ride? You know, for the new private pilots out there, are you really ready to take passengers up or ready to do a trip? You know, the scary thing to the DPE is the person that does the check ride and has the family waiting to go off on a weekend excursion after the check ride. You know, I don't know what would strike more fear in the heart of a DPE. You know, maybe there was something that's not in the ACS or PTS, or maybe you even wonder what it's like to fly as a new pilot. You know, and new pilots under other regulations have what we call IOE, or initial operating experience. And you may have heard this before. You know, Part 121, depending upon it, you have 25 hours of IOE plus what they call consolidation. That's 100 hours. And in that time, you have high minimums. Part 135 is along the same lines for commuter operations and turbojet. It may be as little as 10 hours or as many as 25 hours by regulation, not by company. I'll emphasize that. And they have high minimum requirements also for pilots of, you know, less than 100 hours piloting command time for turbojet aircraft. And we even have it in Part 61. If you get a type rating in a simulator and you don't have a vast amount of experience, there's basically 25 hours of supervised operating experience that you need to have. And you know what? The insurance companies really do drive a lot of this on the insurance itself, and they're never going to be less than the regulations. You know, that's never going to happen. And even if it's not a regulatory requirement, it's not unusual. You know, some initial operating experience in the aircraft. I mean, how many times do you talk to someone, John, that has a new insurance policy and they say, oh, they want me to have, you know, 25 hours in type or 10 hours in type with an instructor or something before they can carry passengers?
Oh yeah. No, you're right, Steve.
And, you know, for the comedy related people, you might recognize this, but if you want a little bit of aviation humor, one of the Captain Roger Victor videos, he has the IOE, or What a Flight It Was, or What a Flight. If you're from the 70s, you'll recognize the tune. You know, I just emphasize there, do be aware it is in good humor and may also contain explicit language, but you can go find that on your own if you want a little bit of humor about IOE experiences. So that private pilot, what I almost would talk about, and John and I have talked about this quite a bit, is going to the next level, is starting off with the certification. A lot of people don't recognize this, but you can actually, when you do your private pilot check ride, or any check ride for that matter, this just happens to be the number for the private pilot one, and you can search on FAA safety level of wings just for completing your private pilot check ride. You'll get all 3 flight topics and you'll get all 3 knowledge topics. And your DPE can quickly do it right after the check ride on what's known as the CFI portal. But if not, how do I, hey John, I'm going to give you a fair warning here, but I'm getting a forced software deployment upgrade and now 42 seconds. So if I drop offline, I apologize.
Okay.
I'm trying to get it to stop, but it's not doing it. So we'll see. Hopefully you guys will still be with me. I apologize if it drops out, folks. This is just one of the things we're dealing with right now with so many people on telework.
Yeah, if it drops, stay with us. Stay with us for 4 or 5 minutes, and let Steve and I talk in the background. We might be able to resolve it. So just stick with us.
Yeah. Excellent. But after doing, or kind of the first step I would talk about for IOE for the new pilot is getting that basic wings level. Like I said, your DPE can do it, or your flight instructor. You can even have a safety rep do it. Even us as the FPM, if you're familiar enough with FAAStafety.gov, you can send in we can find out that you did do the check ride and all of that. Step 2, what I'd recommend is for a new pilot is 90 days later, get back, and you can correspondingly probably also accomplish this wings activity right here if you want to find out a little bit more. But look at this as part of your IOE, is do a little bit of a refresher with your instructor on things that gave you concerns from your check ride, maybe things you haven't seen. What is it that you want to know more about? I know I keep a couple lists of things that, you know, I would call, I wish my flight instructor had told me this. Or another way to look at it is, what are you going to be asked about that is important by flight students that is nowhere in the aviation publications or in the practical test standards or ACS, or they're not going to cover on the check ride? You know, those are some interesting lists. You know, what was different from your training maybe that you saw with it, and or even taking a line-oriented flight training based simulator session. And this is one of the great things, the EAA Pilot Proficiency Center simulations, if you look that up. But they now have the ability, and those are popping up around the country with the EAA 365 program, to be able to give wings credit in advanced ATDs. You know, and then, so step 1 is the check ride. Step 2 is 90 days after the check ride. Step 3 of IOE I would call as 90 days more, or 6 months after the check ride. And, you know, here's maybe one of the good wings programs accomplish during this, but maybe it's time for you to try a different airplane, even if it's just for compare and contrast sake. You know, if you've always flown Pipers, maybe you want to try that Cessna a little bit. What have you learned since? That's a good discussion to have with your flight instructor. Is there something you're still nervous about? Or, you know, and I mentioned this, the demonstration stalls, if you're not familiar with that terminology, may be interesting. You know, what have you heard that you want to learn more about? That always happens after you get the certificate. And even if you 6 months after your check ride, you may have never really flown in the season you're in right now, and it might change. You know, have you really ever dealt with snow and ice on the aircraft or on the runway? And then 6 months after that, or 1 year after the check ride, I would recommend, you know, a third time in your initial operating experience. Get a good time to do hit upon the things that we were talking about, incidents, go-arounds, landings. And if within that year you do the knowledge requirements, which are actually pretty darn easy, now at this point in time, 1 year after your check ride, you've accomplished a level of wings. You're proving to yourself that you are a much more proficient pilot. You get to know the wings program, and you've also reset your flight review, which we'll talk about. So you get that reset, you're familiar with wings, you're a better pilot, you've learned things you need to know beyond the check ride, you've had maybe the opportunity to try new aircraft, you're current and proficient, you're engaged, and there's also insurance benefits associated with it. It's not unusual. I know Avemco is a big supporter of the wings program. They will give you 10% off of your insurance, whether it be for your aircraft or renter's insurance. And just about every other insurance agency out there will meet that, I've found. Just so you know, if you're interested, here are the common check rides and flying events if you want to get wings credit, for those of you that are new pilots or about to become new pilots or newly certificated rated pilots. And just so you also know, these are the common flight events for the Wings program. Is flight number 1 involves takeoffs, landings, and emergency operations. Flight number 2 involves stalls and loss of control. And black is for airplanes, and the navy blue is for rotorcraft helicopter. And then flight number 3 is airport operations, airwork navigation. You know, you may want to just snap a quick little clip of this screen so that you do have it if you're one of those finishing off a check ride. You know, and what everybody says to us is, that's great, but what does it cost? How many times have you guys heard that?
Sorry, I was on mute, but yeah, no, you're right. I mean, the cost is such a big factor. People really focus on that, and you know, it's funny. They'll continue a flight when the fuel gauges are bouncing on E just so that they can save, you know, 20 cents on a gallon of gas. And and then after the fact, you know, you find themselves in a position where they're kind of like regretting it and thinking, you know, I would have paid, you know, $5 more a gallon of gas if I could have that time back again. So you're right, Steve.
It is, but here's just an example. You know, to do what we were just talking about. Here's an example. I'll do more than an hour. You know, you might have to taxi out.
But I was talking about the aircraft rental. You know, just assuming 1.3 hours at $150 an hour. Instructor time, we'll assume an hour and a half at $60 an hour. You know, and here's what we end up with a total. You know, and this is at the upper end. I have to emphasize that. One of the things with the Wings program, most of the courses and seminars and the things that are happening all over the area, the webinars like we're doing, they're free. But there's a lot of good pay for services too with it, which is out there and available. But John, you and I have talked about this, the private pilot that finishes up, you know, everybody sticks with it, but it's pretty common for them to work and stay current at their FBO where they rent for about a year after. So, you know, if we make that assumption, how much money are people going to spend? Well, in order to maintain passenger currency, you know, you're going to end up, you know, flying like at least once every 3 months or so. So you're going to already be spending that $585 with it. And just about every single FBO out there, rental place, has just an annual check requirement. So, you know, you're going to be spending that money on that instructor 12 months out anyways, too, you know. So if you start taking a look at it, the cost to you really does change. And another factor that people don't necessarily think about is what happens with the insurance. I was mentioning that is, you know, you might be at $180 for the difference in proficiency wise, you know, for doing this with an instructor, getting completely involved in the Wings program versus if you just did currency only. But you end up being more proficient. And if you've got renter's insurance, which most people do, you're going to probably be saving at least 30 to 50 bucks for doing the Wings program. You know, so now you're already down to about $150. And if you own your own aircraft and saving 10%, you're really talking at least $100 of savings there in relation to it. So now you're really just talking about, you know, the difference that you're going to be spending anyways is only about $80 to $180. You know, to go from being that, you know, good pilot that just did the check ride to being that better pilot to ultimately being that proficient pilot. You know, that's probably the big thing you want to recognize. And the proficient pilot really, you know, we see this. I mean, how few people John, do we see end up in an accident or an incident that are regularly participating in the Wings program or doing annual checks?
Yeah, that's a great point, Steve. I mean, a really great point, because when we look at those stats and we look at that data, people that are involved in any type of recurrent training program, whether they're employed by a company that the regs require them to have recurrent training, or whether insurance companies are driving them back to recurrent training, like with corporate flight departments, or whether they're involved in the Wings program, we see a much, much, much lower rate of not just accidents and incidents, but also enforcement actions that happen with the FAA. There are far fewer remedial training situations across them. So, you know, it's really great right across the board. I mean, I think there's no question that regular recurrent training just pays huge dividends.
Yeah, and we look at all of the internal reports for the accidents, incidents, and pilot deviations. And one of the things on the internal FAA report is, were they involved in the Wings program? And I mean, it is so rare. I mean, so rare to see somebody that the answer to that is yes. We occasionally see pilots that say, oh, yes, I was. And then you dig deeper and it's like, well, I went to an AOPA thing that came around 3 years ago. No, that's not the Wings program. That's a terrific webinar, seminar, you know, meeting, whatever it may be. And it's the same thing for us. We'd love to have you at our local pilot meetings and seminars out there, but, you know, being at a specific seminar will help you on your knowledge, but it doesn't fill the whole concept of being a proficient pilot. And I can't emphasize enough, you know, doing that on an annual basis. One of the handouts we have is this Wings topic of the quarter, but this is kind of like a little bit of a cheat sheet you can use with your instructor if you want to for it. Those of you that have been on webinars with me for the glider world, I have a kind of homemade one of these that I've had for years in the glider world, but the FAASTeam said, hey, we like that idea. And they made this pretty one for the airplane pilots out there. I don't have the skill set to make the pretty one for the gliders, but I do have something similar for the glider pilots out there. So after that, what really want to emphasize to the proficient pilot is set an annual proficiency program. And if you take a look at the calendar year and take the Wings program, just like what you saw the Wings topic of the quarter, is take a calendar year and plan it out and take a look, you know, and we'll focus on the flight first. As I mentioned, flight number 1 deals with the takeoffs, landings, operations, go-arounds. And guess what? When do we see the most incidents? Is that April-May timeframe when people start to get back out there and flying and they're a little bit rusty. And they don't put in the crosswind for those March, April winds. You know, the wind has changed direction in May instead of, for us here in New England, being, you know, northerly is more southwesterly. So there's more of a crosswind maybe on their runway or something, you know, and they end up losing control. So, you know, okay, do a flight with an instructor in March covering takeoffs and landings. That flight topic number 1. Flight topic number 2 is the stalls, loss of control type of things. Maybe do that in November and maybe even consider doing it at night. It's likely that if you do any flying at night and need to be current, it's going to be in that November, December, January, February timeframe. You know, because who flies at night in June in New England? You know, just vampires, right? That's about it, I think. But all of us almost have to fly at night in November and especially December, it seems. So why not do
almost all of the almost all of the day is night in December around here.
Yeah,
you're right.
So why not do flight topic number 2, say in November before the holiday rush, with everything if you want, and get night current, or even more so, you know, you want to love your flight instructor. The slowest time of year for flight instructors is that time frame between Thanksgiving and Christmas. You know, their schedule is much more open then. They'd love to do a night flight, that sort of thing, to make some money to pay for those Christmas presents that they're buying. Maybe do it then. But you can end up doing that and get night current at the same time. And then there's the third one, which is airport operations. And June is usually a much better month for people, or maybe even September. September is one of our best months, weather flying wise. But flight number 3 is on airport operations. I recommend to people get together with a buddy pilot that you both can fit in an airplane with a flight instructor in, and do flight topic number 3 and go to a nearby airport. Maybe go get the breakfast, the lunch, or the dinner. Go to an airport. Doesn't have to be more than 50 miles on it, just as long as it's some other airport. Take a look at the basic definition of cross country in FAR 1.1 and you'll see what I mean. As long as you're using navigation and going somewhere, you can learn a lot, and you can learn a lot from the other pilot, and you can split it. So you can do, 2.5 hour, maybe even as much as a 3-hour flight. One of you fly out, the other one fly back, and look at the different challenges that you have. And if you're doing this and adding in some additional landings with it, you're pretty darn close already to being current. All you need to do is do a solo flight or 2 throughout the year, and you got almost the entire year covered with being the 90-day current out there, which is awesome. And then all you need to do is fill in the knowledge part, which is easy. Knowledge topic 1 is aeronautical decision making, which is one of the harder ones to get, although a lot of places, like I know places that we do regular seminars at in the Boston area, we always try to make sure we at least have one knowledge, one subject in the time frame. I'll use North Central Rhode Island as an example, with some of the terrific safety reps down there that put on events every month through the winter. But they always end up making sure that they cover knowledge topic 1 at some point in their series. But many people end up having to do it in a course format. Hey, guess what? A cold Saturday morning, in January is a terrific time to sit down at the computer and knock out that online course for the knowledge topic 1. Knowledge topic 2, which is common causal factors of accidents, you can catch anywhere. We used to have the New England Safety Expo, hoping to have something similar, if not resurrecting it completely in the future. But there's Sun and Fun and other events going on with flying clubs in April before the season starts. You can catch one of them there, and then all you have to do is fill in a seminar at some other point. Knowledge topic 3 is elective, and you can end up, covering the whole year. And what you've done is you now are helping to make sure that you, as a proficient of a pilot as you can be, but you're also maintaining currency and getting involved almost each and every month. If you do specialized aircraft, of course, you always want to focus in on specialized training there too. Typically, your insurance company is going to have some initial, if not recurrent, but always think about that, is you probably want to do some specialized recurrent training too every year. And, even though, being a Part 121 airline pilot, getting checked will count as your flight review, you got to think, if you're doing flying different from this, say flying that or that, you're going to want some specialized training in it. Is getting a 121 AQP check means that you are legal from a flight review perspective, but doesn't mean that you're proficient in these aircraft. You always want to think about, when was the last time that you had somebody check you in these? And that's why it's important to, again, that annual checking and being part of an organization that does it. Now, all of that I had focused off of the newly certificated pilots. But as we had looked at this, I mentioned this concern here to us, and also we focused on the new pilots, the concern there. You're probably taking a look at this screen and seeing the other large grouping that I don't have circled yet, and you might be wondering about that. And that is a large group that does give us concern. You know, I'm going to read you a little something from the annual report that we had for Boston, just to give you an idea and take a look. I mean, we had people beyond their flight review out here, and a few that were getting pretty darn close to it expiring. You know, is quote, it has also been noted that a significant portion of the re-examinations requested by the Boston FSDO, the pilots are well above the national average age, which is 45. In fiscal year 2019, we had 10 pilots notified for re-examination, with 4 of them age 80 or greater. 6 of 10 were older than age 65. Also on the date of this report, which was like right in early November, I believe, only 1 of the 6 had successfully completed their re-exam. That was the person at age 65. And 4 of the 10, where am I? 4 have had their certificate revoked or suspended pending compliance that vary in age from age 69 to 84. This is a difficult subject to tackle and has been discussed between the FDM and safety representatives. And this is a difficult subject for us to tackle because, you know, as we get older, and I'm there too, I got plenty of gray hair now. You know, John, when we first met, neither of us had gray hair.
We were just youngsters when we first met, Steve. We were just youngsters.
Exactly. It just hit me. It's like, oh my.
Yeah, we used to, when we would talk to each other, we would talk about flying a lot when we were younger. Now we talk about flying plus our aches and pains.
Yeah, you know, I know that is the case for a lot of us in the pilot population. But, you know, what's great about the older pilots is they are mentors out there, you know, it is terrific, and it helps to have that older pilot that's been there, done that, and can say to that younger generation, hey, son, let me tell you something. I've been there. I've done that. But one of the things that you want to be aware of is we do have situations where we're having what I would call the reverse mentor. You know, everybody needs a mentor and flight coach, and we'll talk about that, even us as we do get older. But we don't want to be putting in that situation where we have people talking to us saying, you know, you really ought not be doing that. You know, I maybe the conditions are a little bit too much for you. You know, you need to have somebody that can have that conversation with you, but you want to have it in the right way. And that's why, you know, it's important, I think, throughout all of your flying, but it's very, very important. And it may be a little bit harder to get as you get older, is you need to have someone that can, you know, you can rely on to tell you the truth straight up about how you're doing in your flying. You also need to have that person that you can confide in, you know, if things are not going as well as you want it to be. You know, a flight coach or mentor, you need to have that. And, you know, you also need to look at what your pilot performance baseline is, documenting those results and comparing it as you progress with it. You know, a few additional tips I would give for the older pilot that's looking in there, and this goes back to that flight coach or mentor. If you've been flying on your own, you know, don't be out there on your own. Join a flying club, get involved with other pilots. You know, that's how you're going to find your mentor, your coach. I can't emphasize enough, which we've been talking about, do annual proficiency. We go back to that chart, and this is the accidents and the incidents. You know, we're not worried about the older pilots that are out there doing annual proficiency. There's very few that are having accidents and incidents. It's those older pilots that are not doing annual proficiency, that are using the flight review, bumping up near the edge of it and going beyond it, are the ones that really are concerning us. The older pilots that are doing annual proficiency, we really don't have to worry about them. You know, they're right on there. You know, with your flight coach, you know, or let's say annual proficiency. Let me back up. Just be aware, it's almost a must now with insurance. Insurance companies are pushing this. And one of the things that I describe on this is if you've reached the age that you can retire, you know, at your company, at Social Security or whatever, it's up to you whether you want to retire or not. But if you've reached that age and you're flying, you really also, I think, have reached that age where you need to be doing an annual proficiency check of some sort. You know, and the Wings program is terrific for that. The Classic, if you don't use it, you lose it. And you need that flight coach to help you with reviewing your personal minimums. And do think about the changes in your type of flying. It's okay not to fly IFR anymore. You know, it's okay to go from a tail wheel to a tricycle gear. You know, we see it in motorcycles. Why not in airplanes? You know, you can practice some on your own. Just some of the tips with it is have a plan. Make sure you're doing the standards. Document, write it down, you know, and like I said, having a mentor or a coach that you can discuss, that you can confide in. How did it go? What do you want? Maybe, hey, this didn't go quite the way I wanted. Next time we get together or next time I'm with an instructor, I want to do this. And for annual proficiency, also think about expanding your horizon. You know, you already know you can get Wings program for adding a new rating, you know, maybe as part of a tailwheel checkout with an instructor, even if you're not going to fly it. You know, I put this picture in here because I know we have one flight instructor that in the glider world every year holds multiple camps for pilots to learn how to winch launch. And it's not that glider pilots will end up doing that often, but he does the weekend long camp, and in conjunction with it, he does, you'll get a sign off for the Wings program because you do enough of it there. And also, he takes advantage. If he signs off 15 different people for the Wings program, you can renew your CFI based upon that. And that particular instructor I know does that every year. And that's how he not only does the Wings program, but he always is signing off more than 15 people for the Wings program and renewing his CFI every year, you know, just through the Wings program. Now, here's one of the things. This, you may want to take a screenshot of this too, is, you know, your spouse or whomever. Yes, the FAASTeam does say, if you're going on vacation, go fly. You know, take the opportunity, even if, you know, for a dual flight with an instructor, if you have the time. It gives you the opportunity to see new aircraft, new airports, new terrain, new weather, gives you a completely new perspective. You have that Wings topic of the quarter. You can do one of these activities with them. You know, you can learn a lot and become a much, much better and proficient pilot just through that. Now, what does proficiency cost for someone that's doing it regularly? I'll give you an example. This is me. This is what I do myself, and John and I have talked about this, and it involves ground and flight with it. And I'll give you straight up what my costs basically end up being. One of the things that I do for each aircraft that I fly in regularly each year, I do an annual quiz. I sit down and review it. Usually I like to review it with an instructor if I can. If not, I'll sit down and do it and then go find them or find the answers in the book. And even because I will occasionally fly some atypical aircraft that you don't see in typical rental fleets, some of those quizzes I've had to make up myself. And that's what I do on year one, is to learn about the aircraft when I'm first doing it. I'll sit with the book open and make up a quiz and find where the answers are and stuff and set it aside. And then a year later, I'll just print it blank, you know, without the answers, and go through and sit down and do it and find out where I'm weak, where I'm strong about that aircraft. You know, this is because of me and work, but, you know, numerous seminars, webinars, courses on FAAStafety.gov and other places. Okay, that's a given. That's what I do for work, so that's an easy one. But I also, many of you know I fly gliders, but even though it's not required, every year I do what's called the Wing Runner course from the Soaring Society of America. Because I tow also, every year I do the tow pilot course. I just did the Wing Runner course last weekend. I probably will do the tow pilot course this coming weekend, and get the little certificate for it. Every spring I go to the Redbird Crosswind Trainer. It's fairly inexpensive, but I do that in the spring, kind of prep for it. Also in the spring, I go to an FBO that I've rented their tailwheel from, but I'll do kind of a tailwheel checkout currency with one of their instructors. And in the fall, because I'd like to rent a 172 over the winter months, try to fly it at least once a month. But in the fall, I'll do a checkout with the FBO every year in their 172 and do it at night. And then, as you do know, I fly gliders. I'll fly 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 times through the season with another glider CFI to either look at something in particular or just, hey, let me do some of these maneuvers, tell you what I'm doing, see if I'm on track with it. And this is my annual proficiency program here. And John, you've seen it, right? You've sat right behind me, coercing the flight instructor and the crosswind trainer.
Oh yeah. I think I paid him actually to give you a really difficult crosswind.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, you're right, Steve. I think that is a great example of an annual proficiency program, and I think it shows the importance of just sitting down with a piece of paper and sketching something out for yourself. For each of the people, each of the pilots that are out there, it's really important. Just put it on paper and tailor it to what you actually need.
Yeah. And all that totals about $625 for me for the year. So much of this is free on the knowledge side. Sometimes I will do a pay for course type of thing. I'm actually planning on doing one of those coming up here in the near future with it. But the Redbird Crosswind Trainer is actually really cheap. The tailwheel with an instructor for an hour or two, a couple $100, but you plan on it. Because I'm a member of the Glider Club, it's usually not too expensive for me there to do those couple flights. And because I do instruct, there's so many times that I build up credits for tow, it ends up being cheaper. So, but overall, it's about $625. But I also have insurance for my own glider that I fly. And because of that, I get $200 off with this annual proficiency program in the wings, is because I'm involved at the level of proficiency I'm involved at. I get basically 20% off, which is about $200. So that's only $425, Now, granted, yeah, I spend more than $625 or more than $425 a year on flying. But you know what? For $500, I'm willing to pay that amount to help assure my safety and correspondingly the safety for my family and the people that I'm flying with. That's all that it costs. It's about $500 a year. Now, we are in that situation, and we get about 5 to 10 more minutes here, folks, that we're all going to be having to get back into it. I've wanted to be flying recently. I haven't. It's been a week and a half now since I last flew. Remember that, if I miss a day, if I miss 2 days, if I miss 3, I'm in that mode. I'm starting to feel the first little inclinations of rust because I haven't flown as much as I wanted to this winter, and also have had a couple spurts where it's been longer. But, because of what we're dealing with in today's world, we're going to have to get back into it. And now is the time to start planning. If you haven't done the Wings program before, try it out when we get back into this and get the knowledge credits done now. You're going to get knowledge credits for this webinar. Take a look at other seminars, webinars, courses. It's time to refresh on your airplane. We'll talk about that in a minute. To check your airplane. Also, even though many of them are not operating or not operating regularly, now's the time to check with your school instructor or if you want to use a simulator, maybe look at the EAA Proficiency program. Start thinking now about scheduling in advance. There is going to be a rush, come May, June, I suspect, at the flight schools for everybody to get recurrent or refreshed. Otherwise, we're going to be picking up a lot of bent metal, which we don't want to do. Also recognize that you might expire. If you're operating on that flight review and doing it every 24 months, there's a lot of people that operate that way that are going to expire on their flight review. But if you're doing an annual proficiency program, and especially doing it with wings, you won't expire. I know I'm good through May of 2021, because usually in May is when I get the last of the wings program signed off for me. Now is the time with your aircraft to read the book. If you got your own aircraft, take the time to sit in it. Try to remember what the weird things are, like that red handle in your aircraft. Run some of the performance charts, review the speeds. Remember the quiz thing that I talked about. That's exactly what I'm doing in my proficiency program with those quizzes. And believe it or not, I didn't even realize this, but the UAV pilots, the wings program can work for them above and beyond. I know I get a private pilot that works in the small UAS industry whose flight review is about to expire, and he's now going to end up in a situation where not only is he not current to rent the airplanes, but with the flight school closed, he can't do it. And because he operates UAVs for a living under Part 107, and we have 107.65 is what he operates under, he may actually go non-current for his work in the drone industry right now. So, there is the wings topic of the quarter. You can do the knowledge stuff. There's the online courses, which we'll mention. Some of them are pre-listed there. They're self-paced. You can do it at home, which is great. You have all sorts of rewarding flight activities with it. And the wings program allows you to document your proficiency. It keeps track of everything that you do, which is awesome. And all you need to do is create an account on FAAStafety.gov, complete your profile, and basically get involved with it. If you need some help, this is available as a download too, but here's 3 short videos. I think the longest one is only 14 minutes on the Wings program and how you can get your credit. There's also what's known as the Wings Pro, and spelled just like you see there, that you can find online. If you take a look underneath the FAASTeam directory, put in your office, where you were located, and the keyword Wings Pro, you can search, and you will end up getting a listing of who the Wings Pros are in your local area that can help you get this and more. Now, here's the last thing that maybe not everybody knows about the Wings program is, believe it or not, for the last couple of years now, we have the Wings Industry Advisory Committee, which has run a sweepstakes for those that complete the levels of wings. It's been supported by Paul and Fran Berger, and it's a $10,000 sweepstakes that has been continued on yet again. You can find out more about it here, but in a simple sense, what they do is they take $10,000 and do a sweepstakes. The more times you complete a level of wings is an entry. So for each level of wings, and they have 4 $1,500 winners, 4 $750 winners, and 2 $500 winners. So we have 10 people around the country. If you look at just my example of proficiency, is we have 10 people that are going to win enough money to pay for their proficiency level for the entire year through this program. So do recognize that that is available out there. So we do want to thank you. I hope that you give strong consideration. Like I said, the most important thing to being a safe pilot is being part of an organization and doing some annual checking. one of the best ways I think you can do the annual checking is with the Wings program and setting up an annual proficiency program. So I do want to thank you for joining us. You know, no need for you to stay on, but we will take some time and answer some questions here, and do appreciate you joining us this evening. So I'm going to go ahead and stop recording.